My last guest this evening is an iconic Cork man. He's seen us through 10 Olympics, 9 World Cups and countless other momentous occasions. So, at the end of one of the most contentious weeks ever in Irish soccer, he joins us tonight to give his view on that and many other things. Please welcome Bill O Herlihy. Bill, how are you? Very good. Would you like to sit in here? Would you like me to go over there?
Well, I'd much prefer to be asking the questions than answering the questions.
Now, we should have somebody to do subtitles on hand, because once we start now, it's going to go into deep Cork.
Yeah, you're right.
You're right. Listen, Trapattoni survived. You delighted?
Well, I suppose as the anchor, I shouldn't have any opinion, really.
No, but you're not the anchor tonight.
No, I'm not the anchor. I'm disappointed, to be honest. I thought that he's achieved a lot, and there's no point in saying he hasn't. But at the same time, I felt that he'd come to the end of his particular cycle, and I felt it was time for change. And it was extraordinarily dramatic because there were so many stories circulating. Sense that
not from John Delaney.
No, obviously not.
Yeah.
That has been made perfectly clear.
Yes.
And also in the studio, we felt inevitably when we heard that the press conference had been cancelled, that something dramatic was about to happen.
Yeah.
And I thought that, I don't know what you thought, I thought that was the best sports television for years.
It was amazing. It genuinely was. And you had this good sense to sit there and shut up and let them at it as well.
Oh, absolutely. I said to myself, this is fantastic, and keep away from it.
Yeah.
But people said like that there was such passion. People thought also, of course, that there was a lot of acrimony. But they all went out for a meal afterwards.
Did they? Because I genuinely thought Brady was never going to speak to the others again. Yeah.
It wasn't theatre, like it was passion.
Yeah.
But there was no kind of animosity behind it all. There were 3 soccer guys with very strong opinions, especially Dunphy and Brady.
Yeah.
And they just said that was it, you know?
Yeah. I noticed Dunphy there at one point decided we should bring back Mick McCarthy. Dunphy having owned Mick McCarthy.
Right, well, he actually made that point the previous time we discussed the matter.
Yeah.
You know, after the German match, he said, me of all people talking about Mick McCarthy, but he said that from the time he had managed the Irish team to today, there had been a huge transformation.
Of course, he's grown.
You know?
He's grown since
exactly.
and everything. Yeah. I suspect from reading your book, I suspect you wouldn't mind Roy Keane getting a go off the job, would you? You're a great admirer of his, aren't you?
Oh yeah, I was I was always a big fan of Roy Keane, and I always felt that in terms of Saipan that he was very badly treated.
Yeah.
Ferguson said to me in a conversation one time that was the worst example of management he'd ever seen. Because he said, I couldn't understand, he said, how the top player of the team would be put in a position where inevitably he was going to explode.
Yeah.
He had, if you remember, he had given an interview to Tom Humphreys, and that interview was something that he had already outlined in detail to McCarthy, but yet he had to explain it to everybody, and the consequence was, of course, that he was raging. He was insulted that he should have had to explain it to everybody, and of course, inevitably he walked out, which Ferguson took the view was the intention of the whole thing.
But seriously, do you think he'd make a good manager of the Irish team?
Well, certainly there would be some doubts about his man management. I heard a very interesting proposition being put forward that himself and Kevin Kilbane would be a terrific combination because Kilbane would be a moderating influence.
Yeah.
But obviously Keane was very successful in Sunderland for a period of time, but not since, unfortunately. You know?
Yeah. You admit in the book that one of the reasons, as much as you agreed with Roy Keane in Saipan, logically, one of the reasons that you agreed with him was, of course, because you are a deeply tribal Cork man, aren't you?
Oh, I make no bones about the fact that I'm a tribal Cork man, but that wasn't the only reason. I felt that there was a background to it in terms of the Niall Quinn testimonial match, and he didn't attend it.
Yeah.
And he couldn't understand, for instance, why we went to this island, Saipan, which is a kind of it's a halfway stop between bringing women from the Far East to Europe for sex reasons.
Right.
It had no pitches, it had no facilities, and they were going out drinking with the media. He couldn't understand that a week before the World Cup, and he felt also that was that we were going to have a bad World Cup in quality terms.
Yeah.
And Ireland had a very good chance. He just couldn't understand it, so he exploded.
You suggest, of course, that he should have been brought out a week later when they'd all had
I think if he had been brought out a week later, it might have been better for everybody.
Of course, you and the panel were players and all this as well. There's that great story about So I think it was during a commercial break one evening.
Oh, that's
Dunphy
right.
was, of course,
phone,
Roy Keane's unofficial spokesman. So Dunphy's phone rings and it's Roy Keane.
It's Roy Keane. And he said, there's a guy outside the gate. He said, his name is Tommy Gorman. Who is he? Should I talk to him? He wants to do an interview. And of course, that was a famous interview. And Dunphy said, of course. He said, you need to explain yourself to the Irish people. This is a good journalist, he said, and a very credible guy. And he said, talk to him and you'll get a lot out of it. It'll do you good. So he did the interview. Yeah. And afterwards he rang Dunphy. I'm not going to say precisely what he said,
okay.
But what the fuck was all that? It might have been the beginning of the end between Keane and
that was the beginning
Dunphy,
of that little love-in, yeah. But I want to go back to your tribal Cork man kind of thing, because I think it's a thing that doesn't get an airing enough on RTE about just what it is that is so innately superior about Cork and Cork people. And that.
I love it.
What do you think it is, Bill?
Well, I think it might be the sense of community. I remember Peter Barry, who was one of the great leaders Fine Gael had, who never became Taoiseach, and I think they would have won an election with Peter Barry. But he was Minister for Foreign Affairs, and he was talking to a group of business people in Cork Airport. And I suppose because he was a little bit detached from Cork in the sense that he lived in Dublin to a large extent as a minister, he said, you know, there is too much tribalism, he said. There's too much of this kind of chip in the shoulder stuff. He said, why not forget about Dublin? Why not, he said, be the first, second city? And there was a dead silence. The first, second city, Cork, as the Bishop Lucy used to say in the old days, was no mean city. And they wanted Cork to be the first city.
Yeah, of course. And the thing is as well that we define ourselves by not being Dublin. How could we, if we forgot about Dublin, we wouldn't know who we were ourselves in a strange way.
Yeah.
It's
but
a mixture of
a
superiority complex and inferiority complex.
Yeah, but also the question, I think, of the fact that we're a very closely knit community. I remember in my public relations, wearing my public relations hat, I was handling a British Airways function in Cork. It was the opening of a very small office, and Jack Lynch was Taoiseach, and he came down to do it, which was a great thing. And all the big wheels came across from the UK, all the managing directors and the marketing directors and all that. And Jack Lynch started his speech. He said, when my friend Bill O Herlihy asked me to come along here today, and I said, oh, great, fantastic. And afterwards they said, Taoiseach, that was terrific, I said, to say that, my friend. And why wouldn't I, he said. Aren't you one of our own?
and in fact, you weren't kind of one of his own, really, because you're a big Fine Gael.
Oh, yeah, but I voted for Jack Lynch on the one occasion when Cork was a unified city, yeah.
Right.
Jack Lynch was like Christy Ring, you know, to all of us.
Yeah, of course, yeah. But apart from that, you were part of you were kind of notorious at the time. The National Handlers, you were called. Was that Garrett's government?
Oh, that was Garrett's government.
And you were kind of like what the advisors that we had.
Yeah, they decided. It was Ted Nealon actually put it in place. It was a group of people that were brought together to look at what government policy was in the context of communications. And to make recommendations. It had no other function than that, you know. John Healy christened them the National Handlers, and there was a suggestion that all of us were kind of an unelected government, really, you know, which was all codology.
That's the civil service, isn't it?
Exactly. Well, I mean, there was the actual government. We were just people on the side, but we made a contribution, but the contribution was a limited one, and of course was distorted for political reasons by the opposition.
Okay. And you also, did you nearly run for president for Fine Gael?
Not at all, I did it, But I tell you, I was asked by Garrett's wife.
Yeah.
She said to me, would you be interested in running for president? And I looked at her and I said to myself, was she serious? And she was serious. She said, you were the only person, she said, who would beat Brian Linehan. Right. And I said to myself, I would get more Christmas cards than votes. And I said, no, thank you.
No, thank you.
And I wouldn't have. There's no question of it.
Mary Robinson was the only
Mary Robinson beat Brian. Yeah, I wouldn't
so
have had a
instead of
chance.
Mary Robinson, we could have had a year of okie dokie in the park.
There you are, no.
Listen, you could have gone on him in the UN High Commissioner. She would have solved everything all over the world. Okie dokie, lads, take it easy now. Listen, speaking of Fine Gael and matters like that, I know you're a huge supporter of Enda, and you make no bones about that.
Yeah.
He's had a tough week, hasn't he? A backbench revolt. I suppose they came back with no deal, whatever way you try and look at it. Support for the government down to 21%.
Well,
you
Fine
know
Gael are
him
at
well now.
31%, aren't they? You see, I think Enda has always been misrepresented and has always been. I don't know whether it is the fact that he's from the west of Ireland, that he's not metropolitan or whatever, but I think he's always been underestimated. And when you look at his achievements, he's taken Fine Gael. They were on the ground completely. They're now the biggest party in Ireland. They're the biggest party in Europe, and they're the biggest party in local government.
Okay,
so
and what are they doing with all
that,
that, though? What is Enda doing with that? Now he's got there.
But
He's
listen,
rebuilt the
he
party.
inherited,
They've got government.
I think we're extraordinarily short-sighted in the sense they're in government for 18 months, and they inherited a huge problem, almost an insoluble problem. Yeah. And when I look at what happened this week, I think in terms of Garrett, and you remember Mrs. Thatcher and her no.
Out.
Or out. Yeah. Was it out, yeah. And I remember, like, Garrett was pilloried in the media at that stage as well, and Mrs. Thatcher came across very strong and very strident. And Garrett didn't do anything. But a year later, he produced the Anglo-Irish Agreement. And I think, I haven't the slightest shadow of doubt that Enda will do the same. And it'll be tough, and we'll all suffer for a while, but he'll deliver.
Okay. Bill, I want to talk about something else that people might know about you, which is that you have a very strong faith. You go to Mass every day.
As much as I can, I do, yeah.
Yeah, pop out from the office and into Mass.
Well, I'm very lucky because the church, St. Mary's in Haddington Road, is just around from the corner from my own office. And I must be one of the very few people. I enjoy Mass. I enjoy going in and talking to the Lord. And I also believe myself that if you believe, there's not an obligation, but I think there should be a public declaration that you also believe, So in the sense that...
Okay, so you testify as well.
Exactly.
For your faith.
Yeah.
And I know it's got you through some quite difficult times, sad tragedies in your own family.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, I came from a very loving Cork family, which was quite religious as well. My mum and dad were very religious. And like, we said the rosary every day. We were never permitted under any circumstances to miss Mass until we had a choice when we were about 18, but not before that.
We didn't get a choice at 18 in my house, absolutely. We still don't have a choice.
Yeah, well, I go to Mass all the time. Yeah. And the funny thing, in spite of the fact that my two sisters died from cancer within a year, my mother, God rest her soul, had a terrible brain tumour, which was awful to watch in the end. My father died from a heart complaint. I had a heart attack at 84, and I had cancer 5 years ago. But it never dawned on me for a second that this was something that was visited on me for any reason at all. And I found great consolation in the fact that I believed, and I put my life in the hands of Our Lady. And I hadn't the slightest shadow of doubt that everything was going to work out. And it did work out, because I'll tell you a couple of extraordinary things. When I was having my heart attack, it was a meeting. It was the day of a meeting before the RTE team went to Los Angeles, and I had a meeting also that day with a company called Park, and they had a hospital in Baghdad, and I knew that hospital well. I was out in Baghdad many times, and Harry Coonahan was the director of medicine, and he was at that meeting, and I wasn't looking well, and I wasn't feeling well, and he said to me, "What was wrong with you?" And I said, "Look, I have a pain in my arm, and my chest is a bit tight." And he went and he picked up the phone to John Horgan, who was a cardiologist in the Richmond Hospital, which is now gone, of course, it's amalgamated. And he said, "I'm bringing a fella down to you," he said, "who's he's at the start of a heart attack." And I hadn't the slightest, and I was going to London the following day because I was handling Woolworths and they were pulling out of Ireland, and there was an 8 o'clock meeting, and I was told had I flown, I would have died.
You were goner.
Your man looked after me, and the same with the cancer.
Do you reckon? Yeah.
Yeah, Hillary, is she here? Oh, Hillary and
Hillary, the wife,
and my two girls forced me to go and get a big checkup, not with the GP, who's a very good guy, but with a proper checkup on my health for the cancer. And I went to the Beacon, and I was there for about. I went in and I got an MOT, and about 7 days later, I was being operated on. 7 or 10 days later, it was for cancer, for colon cancer. They took out. They found a malignant growth the size of a lemon, and they took out 1.5 foot of my intestine. But from that day to today, I never had a single problem.
Okay, so you're clearly indestructible.
No.
Are you ever going to retire?
Am I going to retire? Well, oh yes, I am. In fact, retirement is actually determined at this stage. That
is it?
I'm very lucky. I've been very lucky, thank God, with all the parts of my life. But my RT part of my life is coming to an end my last broadcast, if the Lord spares me my health, will be the World Cup final, 2014 in Rio. No, I will not be in Rio. I'll never go anywhere. I'll be in Dublin. But that'll be my last broadcast.
How old will you be then, Bill?
76.
76. It's been a good old innings. You know what? They'll never be able to replace you. Ladies and gentlemen, Bill O'Herlihy. And Bill's book, we leave it there, so goes on sale next Friday.